Welcome back to Behind the Headlines. How to keep revitalizing downtown Springfield could take a new turn centered around two landmarks, namely the proposed sale of the Hammons Tower and the Hammons building across the street, plus the parking garage next to the tower. Jack McKee is government affairs reporter for the Springfield Daily Citizen and broke this story and joins us now. Welcome back, Jack. Good to see you. First, let's start with this one. Who are the prospective buyers and for how much?
That much wasn't clear based on a sunshine law request that we filed with the city of Springfield. Though email exchanges between city officials included Riley Shantz, a partner at DHTC Development, and the son of Debbie Shantz Hart, who served as general counsel to John Q. Hammons. City documents from 2023 refer to the potential buyer as a development group, though no specific names were mentioned. The price is also not clear, though those same city documents indicate that the development group has a $22 million capital stack or funding structure.
Okay. So what would happen with a change in ownership from the City Hall and Chamber of Commerce perspective? Are there several scenarios?
Yeah, a lot could happen here if the office buildings and the Jordan Valley Car Park were to be sold. In an overview of the possibilities, the Springfield Business Development Corporation, which is a subsidiary of the Chamber, envisions the sale of these properties as and the renovation of Hammons Tower and the Hammons building that they could spur new possibilities for downtown Springfield, including investment into the University Plaza Hotel and Convention Center and development on Hammons Field's surface parking lots.
Okay. So talk about Ballpark Village. What could that be, since the city of Springfield also owns Hammons Field?
Yeah. You know, you mentioned when the city bought Hammons Field in 2023, it also purchased those parking lots, those adjacent parking lots. Sources I spoke with, including Chamber President Matt Morrow and Springfield Mayor Ken McClure, emphasized the importance of the parking lots to Hammons Field right now and how it serves fans that attend games there. But in that project overview from the Springfield Business Development Corporation, it envisions the possibility of a Ballpark Village among the possibilities that could be brought on by investment into these properties, specifically on those parking lots adjacent Hammons Field.
Okay. So would tax abatements be part of the deal for the Hammons Tower, whatever happens, whenever it happens?
Yeah, property tax abatement was one of several possible funding sources that were mentioned through the documents. Specifically, the developers requested property tax abatement through a state bond program to use the money to reinvest in the buildings over time.
Let me ask one more question about the car park. Now, there's a revenue stream, obviously. Would this be public or private? Or would it stay public? Would it go private?
Yeah, the car park, I mean, provides a revenue stream through the paid parking lease spaces there. What it was proposed through these documents, though, you know, clearly nothing is final at this point, and it's very all exploratory. A lot of the sources I spoke to emphasize that. It was proposed through the documents that the city could buy the parking garage, the Jordan Valley Car Park, which sits right next to Hammons Tower, with bonds, state funding, or funding currently allocated elsewhere. However, I mean, as I mentioned, you know, nothing is final, and the mayor indicated that he isn't supportive of the city's acquisition of the parking garage, as he put it, at this time.
At this time. All right. Well, we will leave it there for now. At this time, Jack McKee with Springfield Daily Citizen. You can see Jack's reports online and on social media, as well as this segment on KY3.com, also Roku, Apple Fire Stick. And we thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time, Jack. Thanks very much.
Thank you.